want to thank everybody for coming. I know that Thursday nights are kind of tough. We brought in joeChurchman from Portland, Oregon is where he's living now. He graduated from Central Washington University studying under Keith Lewis, who's a fantastic metal worker and a great reputation. Joe's had works published in the Lark Books 500 Plastics, and was also invited to participate in a related exhibition, The Plastic Show, at the Velvet Da Vinci Gallery in San Francisco. Most recently, he was asked to participate in From Minimal to Bling, a survey of contemporary studio jewelry, sponsored by the Society of Arts and Crafts in Boston. Again, a really important place for the crafts world. So Joe did a demonstration with the art metal jewelry class and quite a few guests today. Earlier, showing some of his techniques. He also has his work up here so that you guys can see him live, and I will leave it to Joe. Thank you for coming.
Hey. Oh, you know what I did forget?
What did you forget?
My notes.
I'll grab them. Do you remember where?
They are in my messenger bag.
Okay.
I'll do my best. Okay. So I didn't know how dark it was going to be, and I'm kind of narcissistic, so I thought I'd include a picture of myself in case you needed to know, better what I look like. So in the beginning, there was man. I was born and raised in Southwest Washington, a little town called Kalama, and it's really small. Like, you think Knack is small, but Kalama is really small. If you're driving on the freeway and you blink, you miss my hometown. But now they have a claim to fame. Parts of Twilight was filmed in Kalama. So now when you drive by, you see a really big sign that says Kalama, a Twilight location. They use the high school, actually. The last 2 years I was in high school, Washington State has this program called Running Start, and it allows high school students to take college credits or take college courses at a university, a state university, and gain college credits from that, as well as high school credits. This is where Running Start is where I first became acquainted with photography as a medium, not jewelry, but photography was my entry into the art world. I attended Running Start because I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't know why. I just knew that I needed to go, which is a great idea because now I have a degree and no job. From there, I went to Washington State University, and I like to forget that year of my life. I paid for it by working construction. So that's me on a bulldozer, and that's Casual Friday, policy I instituted on a job I was really bored with. It paid the bills. It was not my favorite thing, but it paid the bills. But that's how I acquired the neoprene that I ended up started working with. Not these jobs per se, but a job later on in my life. So before the jewelry, like I said, I worked in photography. I transferred from Wazoo to Central. At Wazoo, I had enough credits that they forced me to pick a major, and so I chose philosophy. But when I went to Central, guess what? So I transferred as a philosophy major. I bounced into English for a little while, and then got back into photography. I hadn't done it in years and jumped back into it. But I had problems getting the concepts in my head to come through in the pieces that I was making. And I found I was actually a really process-oriented artist in some respects. Like these first two are from a body of work where I spent tens of hours, 10, 20, 30 hours in our library looking through children's storybooks, which are kind of freaky if you're not reading the story. And I just stole images from those books, and because the deadline was fast approaching, I stole photos from my classmates and combined them all in Photoshop, and learned that I need therapy because nearly all of them have this forlorn kid or this frightened child being harassed in some way by some scary adult figure. But it was a fun project, and it took a lot of time, and I had a great moment. But I didn't have a good photo professor, and so I made this piece after I decided to switch from photography to jewelry. The program was set up in such a way that any one major you had to sample all the other media that our school offered, and so I was very happy about this. So this piece, a little bit about it. It's the last photographic piece I created. It doesn't have a title, but if it did, it would be the FU piece. It's 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It was taken with a 6.7 megapixel camera. It is made up of 9 calotype printed panels. It's 200-pound paper. Calotype is a photographic process related to a Van Dyke Brown. It's a duotone. You don't buy calotype paper. You buy chemicals, you mix them, you paint them on the paper, you let the paper dry. And it's a very time-intensive process, and the pieces were relatively large, so if I messed up an exposure, I was out quite a bit of money. It had 36 digital negatives. This is an alternative processes class, and it's the first assignment that I used a computer. But I had a point I wanted to get across, and it was that I was really fed up with my instructor. So what I did, at 6.7 megapixels, you can't usually blow it up to 5 feet by 4 feet, and so I overlaid text about how upset I was about his teaching and other things. And that broke up the pixels and made for a very interesting image, and then I hung it in such a way that you couldn't actually read any of the text because I wanted people to feel frustrated like I was. And it's the only effective photographic piece I ever made. But this is why you're here, isn't it? So I've got a lot more jewelry than I've got photographs. My foundation, as Lauren said, was from Keith Lewis. And in the beginning class, I learned fabrication. I apologize for the poor quality of the image, but I think you get the point. This I created in my first class. It's just an abstract pin. There's some marriage of metal in there, some patination. This piece has brass, nickel silver, and sterling silver. The pieces in the center, there's 2 elements that are the kind of pointed forms that are twisted in on themselves. And that's something that I kind of just started doing. I don't remember how I came with the idea, honestly, but it was something that I started doing, and I showed it to my instructor. He goes, "You have to teach me how you do that," which I was like really proud of as a beginning student. And those actually, that form came into play for me very recently. I'll talk about that at the end of the show, or at the end of my talk. So, I learned wire fabrication. This is a necklace I did in one of my intermediate classes. A little detail of that. And it's supposed to be dumbbell structures, but I kind of went above and beyond. Enameling, Keith is a big fan of enameling. I learned a variety of techniques there. This is how much I loved enameling. We were supposed to create an enameled stone and set it in a ring, and I kind of spent more time on the ring than I did the enamel. So this is a flask ring. It didn't work too well, but it was fun. The threads were made by hand. We did casting. This piece is a monogram pin that was cut out of wax carved. I drew the design on Photoshop, then pasted it to the wax and cut it out. The texture was added afterward because there was some bubbling that happened in the cast, and so as a way to salvage it, I just applied the texture, which actually made it a lot more visually appealing, I think anyway. We worked with other waxes as well. This was a cast that didn't quite work out, so I made it a statement about global warming. Life hands you lemons. And then die forming. This is the technique that kind of put Keith on the map, and so I took a liking to it just because he was able to put a lot of passion into his teaching of it. And this is a tuatara. This is a mask that I made from 20 gauge sheet. I was able to push the metal out at that eye ridge area right up here. I think I was able to achieve a depth of almost 1.25 inches per sheet with 20 gauge metal, which is really pushing the metal. I made each side about 7 times before I had a finished piece. And then the spikes on it were individually soldered on, and they come together to form the clasp that holds it closed. And so when it's together, it is its own object, and when it's open, it becomes a whole other object, and that was really fun. So then I got into the neoprene, and the way this came about is, like I said, I got it from a job site, and one day I ran out of silver, and within a week the price jumped from $10 an ounce to $20 an ounce, and I wish it was back down there now. But back then I was naive and thought that was really expensive. And so I had some of this stuff lying around, and I took it to my professor, and the conversation went like this: Keith, can I make something out of this? And he looked up at me from whatever website he was wasting time on, and he said, I don't know, Joe, can you? And I took that as permission to go and play around. And the first bracelet that I made is there in the center. You can see it in person after I get done talking. I think the other two pieces are here as well, at least one of them. So the idea was based on those lines, which were something that I couldn't achieve with metal. For various reasons, most metal is not 3/8 of an inch thick. If it is, it's more difficult to move around than 3/8 foam. So it was kind of serendipitous creation, just based on a series of guesses, really. Some trial and error. I came up with that form to display the lines that were in that piece, and then once I had that form, I really liked it, and I thought, well, I don't need to have these lines to achieve this form, and so I experimented with that, creating the other two bracelets that are right next to it, and then I experimented with that form a lot more. This is a photo shoot that I have, many pictures, but I just wanted to try and give you a survey of the pieces that were in it. So I was really playing around with it, and then the piece that the two of them are wearing is not something you typically see in jewelry. You don't see the neck and the wrist joined with any piece, and so that was a really fun thing, and it's given me a lot of ideas that I have yet to actually start work on, but there's a series of those in my future for sure. This piece is the one that's featured in the 500 Plastics book that Lauren mentioned, and I was very fortunate to get it in. Neoprene is actually more of a rubber than a plastic, but at the time I hadn't done that research. And because of that book, I was invited to the plastics show at the Velvet Da Vinci, which is a very successful, very high-end gallery in San Francisco. This piece, I got tired of that form that I was doing with the bracelets, and so I thought, let's go crazy and make this piece. And it's not actually, in retrospect, as crazy in comparison to those pieces as some of the things that I could have done. But it has a very obvious reference, and it photographed really well. And so a lot of people liked it. This piece was responsible for me going to my first National Jewelers Conference, SNAG, in Philadelphia a couple years ago. And I just had a blast with it, but I don't know whether it's because I made it and it wasn't as fun for me to make, or whether I knew the reality behind the photograph, but I was not as big a fan of this piece as some jurors were. And so as a reaction, I made these monsters. And these bad photographs I meant to put in here, and the reason is this, that well, first I'll tell you about the piece, and I'll tell you about why I put the bad photographs in. So
clothing.
So they're both modeled after the Elizabethan ruff, although much more extreme. All of this foam work, I think I didn't mention this earlier. There's no adhesive to it. There's no substructure. It's all foam. It's all mechanically connected. The things that are, sticking out and holding themselves up in the air, there's nothing supporting them except more foam. You can vaguely see that piece coming down in the center there. That piece was necessary to keep tension on that top half, to keep that up in the air. And there's a better photo of these later on. But these pieces mark the first time that I was using different densities of neoprene. Before this, everything was the most dense version that you could get commercially, and so these pieces mark that change in my work, and they also mark the change that these are the first pieces that I did not use. They were not created entirely with a straight edge. These are the first time I used curved cuts to cut out these forms, and so that kind of marked a change, along with the fact that I can make really big objects that were very light and very wearable. And so the reason that I include these bad photos is these bad photos got me invited to that Boston show that's coming up. And I feel very fortunate to have been invited, especially when they asked for this piece specifically. So, you know, if you've got pieces that you're proud of, take pictures and put them places where people can see them, but try and make them good photos. But, you know, bad photos are better than no photos, I guess, is what I'm saying. So after a couple SNAG conferences and a couple other conferences, I realized I kept having the same conversation over and over about my work and about the philosophical implications of it, you know, and the ideas of value and what jewelry is actually saying. And I did a little bit of research on the history of jewelry and kind of some ideas that went along with traditional ways that people wore jewelry before it became commercially available and so on and so forth. And I need to stop saying so on and so forth, don't I? A good friend of mine who was a big fan of my work suggested that I start leafing the material. Well, have you tried it? No, I haven't tried it. I don't have very much experience with leaf. Well, she did. She leafs Lexan and plexiglass quite a bit. And so she said, if you give me a sample of material, I'll do some samples for you. And, you know, I'll tell you what I find. I'll make detailed notes and give those to you. And so she did. And I was very grateful. And now I'm able to add the gold leaf to the pieces, which allowed me to start thinking conceptually about my work. Up until this point, most of the stuff, beyond like a reference to the Elizabethan ruff and some vague notions of formal qualities of jewelry, this is the first time that I really thought about, you know, this is the concept that I want to drive with my work. And so with the first piece, the largest, I actually meant for someone to wear all three of these simultaneously, but they ended up a lot bigger than, you know, in real life than they were in my head, which is probably a good reason you should draw your ideas and sketch and, you know, all that stuff. But I tend to design in my head. So I made them all. This piece is called, I call it the bird and cuff. And the idea that I was trying to touch on with these three pieces is that traditionally, you know, a nobleman or noblewoman would wear a lot of rings on their hand or very cumbersome jewelry, basically to denote that they don't do work with their hands. And so this piece, while being, you know, made of foam, it does have enough presence that there's not much you can do with your arm while you're wearing it, other than hold the piece of jewelry and show people how important you are, that you don't need your hand. This piece, I will admit I used a thesaurus to come up with the name. I call it Corona Rubato. Rubato is an Italian word that refers to some pieces that are kind of in the ruff family, but a rubato, rather than laying flat like the Elizabethan ruff, would actually come up. And that's kind of where I landed on that. And then this piece is meant to be worn. The scale is a little bit off on this model, and I've got another photo where I can talk about that a little bit more. But it's meant to be worn down around the shoulders and come up and obscure the peripheral vision of the wearer to signify, number one, I'm the important one, I'm the one you should look at, and all these points that are pointing in her face definitely draw your attention visually to her face to kind of denote that this is the person you should be paying attention to. And then the second kind of thing that this piece accomplishes is it cuts down the peripheral vision, so the person who's wearing it can only look forward. And so by wearing it, they're saying, this is what's important to me. And if you're not here right now, you're not important to me. So it's definitely talking about status in a very bold way. This piece I call the trammel cuff, and it has a very similar function to the burden cuff, except that rather than just completely making your arm useless, it allows you to still gesture very clearly to those who will do your bidding. So definitely some talk about status, and it was really fun to make these pieces. My latest show was really fun. Back in July, I was able to do my first runway show, the first time I got to see all of my work on a runway, and it was through an organization called rawartist.org. I mean, that's their website anyway. I think they're Raw Underground Artists or something like that. And so I got this runway show, and I put an ad on Craigslist, and I said, hey, I need models for a show. And I was really excited by the caliber of people that I got. So this is Casey. That makeup scar on his face is actually a real scar on his face. I thought having someone that was so made up and had their body modified so much with all the tattoos and stuff would be a very interesting addition to my work. And I think he pulled off this piece really well. I just really like this photo because he has no body behind this thing. And then you finally get to see the detail that's in the piece. And he was a delight to work with. He's a really nice guy. This is Alima. She had a really big personality and didn't understand that the work was really big enough that she didn't have to be any more flamboyant than to just walk out there calmly and wear the work. And so she walks out there with her arms up like this, and when there's a piece that is supposed to go around your shoulders, she didn't seem to get the fact that this causes your shoulders to go up, which causes the piece to go up, and she starts messing with the stuff. So you need to really, if you're working with models, you gotta really be explicit with them. But she was the only one that I really had a problem with. Some of the pieces, I didn't design the makeup. I worked with a makeup designer to do that. She was part of the organization, kind of furnished by that. So I wasn't really out any money. I didn't have to hire anyone to do this, which was really nice. It's amazing how much you can get for just asking. And so this is Leilani. She did a wonderful job modeling the bird and cuff. And then something you can do on the runway that you can't really do in photographs, it doesn't quite read the same, is you can do weird things like putting a bracelet on an ankle. And on a runway, on a couture show, it works somehow. And sometimes you have pieces like this that look good in a post photograph, but on the runway they don't work out very well. He was a great model, it's just the piece needed to be posed. And so, that didn't cross my mind when I was doing the show. And then sometimes you get really good models. This is Marielle, and she did a great job. I couldn't have asked for more from her. This is Jennifer. Jennifer's 17 years old. 2 weeks before she agreed to work with me on this show, she was crowned Seattle's top model. I was very happy to have her as my model, and she made this piece work. She was amazing, and sometimes you get lucky, you hit gold. And so that was a really fun experience for me. I'm really hoping to do it again. There's kind of a second half to that story, but it's still in process. So maybe we'll leave that on the to be continued. And then this is the best photo I have of something I've been working on lately. Getting out of school, I got out of school in 2009 and was just trying to get my bearings up until very recently. And I kind of figured out that working construction is not what I want to do the rest of my life. I want to make jewelry. And so I've been thinking a lot in the lines of production work and things of that sort. And so I started thinking, making pieces that are facsimiles of those first 3 bracelets. And that was really fun, but still very time consuming. And I started thinking back to that first pin, that abstract pin that I made, and that simple technique of piercing through and then opening up that piece of metal. I thought, why can't I do this with the neoprene? And so I tried it out, and it made this really interesting piece. It was this star shape, very innocuous looking, but then you can run your hand through it, and it made this bracelet. You saw earlier Marielle was wearing 3 of them in that photo, and then on the bracelet mandrel here in the background, or in the kind of the center of the photo, I've got 3 sitting there. And so I made a few of these, and I thought these are kind of cool, but it still takes me, a half hour to make one. And I started trying to figure out, how can I get these working better? How can I pump them out faster? And so I Googled, rapid manufacturing processes and stuff like that, and I ended up talking with a gasket manufacturer in Wilsonville, Oregon, who had done, usually industrial gaskets, but they had done a little bit of work for an artist that worked in out in the gorge in between Washington and Oregon. And I talked to him about what I wanted and what my goals were. He said, draw something up online or on the computer and send it to me and we'll talk it out. And so I had my first mass production experience, and it was really interesting to me how easy it was, how accessible it was, and how easy it was to work with these people who couldn't probably care less what I was doing, but he sounded genuinely interested in helping me. So that was a really interesting experience, and it's kind of changed the way I thought about designing work and given me kind of a lot more options as far as what might come out of me in the future. So that ends the slide portion of my talk. I welcome any questions you might have for me. If you'd like to come up and look at some of my pieces, do you think we should do that, or should I pass them around?
I think we could pass them around, and then, well, let's get questions first.
All right. Any questions at all? Yes.
I've never worked with neoprene, but I have had things made out of neoprene, and after a while they seem to dissolve.
Really?
Is that an issue with your work?
I've only been working for it for 4 years, with 4 years, four years, and I have not had a problem with it yet. I still have my first bracelet that I made. It's up here somewhere. Excuse me. It's up here somewhere, and it still works fine. Originally, the stuff when I took it from the job site, it was going to be a gasket for a very large pipe, and so it's going to be constantly getting dirty, exposed to the elements, and so on. And so I didn't really have any concern for it. And it's quite dense. Most neoprene that is on the market, that people typically experience is the lowest density. It's called IB1, and I work with IB3, which is the highest density. So there's a marked difference.
Are you talking about like the neoprene swimsuits and skin diving equipment, that kind of thing, or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just know it starts to break down and then get black stuff.
I think that's a lower grade, just because these things are pretty rigid.
Yeah.
You want to be able to move around in that.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably already mentioned this, but I probably missed it. But how do you cut it?
With a scalpel. Yeah, I cut it all by hand.
Even the really thick stuff?
I don't work with anything thicker than 3/8 of an inch right now.
Oh, okay.
No. Any other questions?
It's interesting that you got involved in the runway scene and that component of art, because especially the haute couture, the way they're doing. Have you thought about color?
Unfortunately, neoprene only comes in one color. The closest thing to it is the gold leaf, and I can also apply silver and copper leaf, but it's a closed cell foam, so it doesn't absorb really. Somehow the gold leaf works. I haven't really tried other compounds because I'm not really there yet. When I first started working with this stuff and talking with different people about it, I get a lot of similar questions. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? And the way that I've chosen to work is I liken it to the scientific method of isolating variables and then just changing one. And actually, I have an ongoing project that I talk about on a website that I'm involved with, and I refer to the bracelets as part of this project. I call it the Permutations Project, where very obviously I rely on this one form, but what I try and do with each one is just change one element and see how much I can push the variety of object that I create, how much they keep the same identity and how much the identity changes. So eventually I'll get to there. My next step, the reason I got into the runway thing and the haute couture and that whole thing was because of those very large roughs. It really allowed me to, and I made them just because I was tired of everyone liking that little rough. That just seemed like a pittance to me. I can do so much better is what I thought. And so that's how I made them. And then I realized that, whoa, these are wearable. I mean, you can't walk through a door, but the models didn't have a problem with them. They weren't falling over. It's really light. It was actually really fun for them to wear. You can, in some respects, I think because I chose the makeup and the outfits that I did, we ended up going a much more serious route. But if I end up doing it again, I'm going to change things up, do some different music, different outfits, and really ask the models to just have some fun with it. And that's part of the thing that I really noticed with this work is the people that wear it have really a different appreciation for it than people who just look at it. In fact, at the snag that was in Houston last year, I took some of my production pieces to sell at the suggestion of an old timer in the business, and one of the first people to purchase one from me, her name is Brigitte Martin, and she runs a social networking site for craft artists called Craft House. And she was the first person to have one on her arm, and she was walking around, and everyone who went to that conference kind of knew who she was if they didn't know her on a personal level. And she would walk around and, oh, where'd you get that? And, you know, eventually a couple other people purchased them. And when they saw each other, this was something that was really fascinating to watch, a bunch of jewelry geeks, when they saw each other and said, oh, you got one, I got one, as a form of greeting, they would bump bracelets, which is not something that you see when someone's wearing a $10,000 tennis bracelet, you know. I was at dinner that same evening with Brigitte and a couple other people, and one person, I mean, almost from me to you, it was a big group of people, big dinner, said, hey, can I see your bracelet? And Brigitte pulls it off and throws it across the table. And I don't have a problem with that, because I know it can take it. But you don't see that with traditional jewelry. You don't see that with most art jewelry either.
It's fun.
Yeah, and that's something that I really enjoy about it. And so one of the things I'm moving towards is more costuming stuff, the stuff that involves the body a lot more. A good friend of mine did fashion merchandising, fashion design, and so I'm going to be working with her a little bit to develop some ideas, incorporating industrial zippers, some buckles and things like that, and seeing how I can play with form that way.
Have you taken a lot of influences from like BDSM?
No, actually.
Because I can see
yeah.
it taking off.
I do get that suggestion quite a bit. In fact, when I first showed my family the piece that goes from the neck to the wrist, in these photos, there's 2 photos where him and her are involved in wearing that piece. And when I showed that to my family, they're like, oh, whoa, you know. I come from a very conservative family, and, you know, they didn't have much to say beyond that, but I got the meaning, you know. And the ideas come up. A lot of people have suggested that I submit this work to the Seattle Erotic Arts Festival, which I just, for no good reason, I haven't done it yet, but eventually I'll get there. Yeah. Yes?
I'm sorry, I didn't attend your workshop, and if I had, I probably would know the
That's
answer.
okay.
But so you said you don't use any adhesives. So are you using tabs or?
I use it in a rivet fashion. So what I'll do is I'll pass these around when I'm done explaining it. But I'll take a piece that's this big around. You know, these are square in cross section. But I'll take a piece like this, and I will use pliers to pull it through a hole that's this size. And the hole expands a little bit, and the piece that I'm pulling through contracts a little bit, but not so much that they slide easily on each other. And part of that is the sizes that I chose, and part of that is the surface of the material. It's not quite a smooth enough material to just pull smoothly.
What about more so like I can see pieces on like Lord of the Rings type armor and everything coming down like arms and whatnot also. Types of effects, so it's like shoulder pad type thing.
Mm-hmm. I definitely, so being a white male between, a heterosexual white male between the age of 20 and 40,
Yeah.
I feel like I have to be kind of careful on what I reference. I, for one, love the work of Nick Cave. He's a craft artist. He makes these things called sound suits, but they draw very heavily on African dress. And I think African costume is fascinating as heck because it incorporates movement. And that, to me, is a really fascinating part, especially when I have work that can be moved in. And so I really want to draw on that, but I don't want to give the notion that I'm just taking this cultural identity for myself and I know nothing about it, you know. So that's something that has been in the forefront of my mind when I design these things, but maybe it's just something I'm a little scared to do, and maybe I just need to do it and see what happens, you know.
Maybe like spray paint them and put them with a different name. But, ooh, see what you have.
Yeah, well,
audience reception.
it's not that I think I can never do it. I just think I need to do it the right way, and I'm just not sure what that is right now. But on the same token, there's a lot of stuff in the European fashion history and costume history that I can look for. Back when waistcoats were actually kind of belled out, had some shape to them. Back when the European royalty had clothing that really accentuated different parts of their body. There was different types of plate armor and things like that. I can reference all of those things, and eventually I'll get there. But that leaping from things that are a jewelry scale, even a large jewelry scale, to things that are a costume scale, requires a little bit of a skill set that I'm not sure I have yet. I've been trying to build it. But well, the way that darts work, you know, something that you don't really discuss in metalsmithing. You know, but I know there's resources out there. If there's one thing I've learned since I've been making this stuff is there's resources out there. Before I started working with neoprene, I didn't know that there were stores where all they sold was foam. It never crossed my mind that I can just go to a foam store and pick this stuff up. They exist.
I was going to mention on the color question, Richard, that I think one of the things that was beneficial even at the SNAG conference, and how I said people would see it, that color actually, I think probably became what made it pop. Because so many of the metal artists are either using metal or they're using like really bright plasticky colors. And that's actually the reason why every time I saw them, I remembered them. Was because it was always black. So, you know, eventually it might switch, but it is, I think since I've known you, it's kind of been beneficial.
Well, I mean, it may end up being that little like dress kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean.
But, I mean, you know, if it's going to move into the fashion scene, I think the color is going to impede its acceptance.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like perhaps, you know, there might be an idea of thinking of wrapping, a cloth wrapping, much like you do with enameling. You know,
Well,
really sew it into the structure, because you are sewing. You are really sewing. You're rivets more or less like a stitch.
Yeah, very similar. And it's not unheard of for neoprene to have a cloth backing. It's just usually not in a high density. Because your wetsuits and your hip waders and your laptop cases.
Right, they're lower density because they have to move.
Right, exactly. And I actually, there's a jewelry artist who, when he saw this stuff, but his name's Boris Bally, and when he saw my work and I spoke with him about it, he says, "I want you to make me a suit out of this stuff." Yeah. And I'm just thinking, oh man.
You're gonna walk around like a tin can.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, then he shared with me a story where he had a friend who made work out of tarps, blue, you know, the blue tarpaulin, and he asked that friend to make him a suit out of a tarp, and he wore it at a conference and sweated like crazy. But he wore it. He stuck with it. Like, there goes Boris in a big blue suit, you know.
You should have gone to Anchorage instead of Miami, right?
Yeah.
Well, I sort of see another direction you can take in terms of accessorizing is really furniture and fixtures. Like, why couldn't you have a flotation device designed for Virgin Airlines or something? But even a chair or you know, receptacles to receive things like a toy box. I think all those things sort of draw upon your sense of playfulness and can still reference those historical roots, like 16th century Britain. That kind of joyful overstatement, but just for the fun of it. And I think you might be able to avoid some of those erotic connotations that might overwhelm the work sometimes, and cause people to read them in more specific ways. If you want to broaden the sense of how you read it, I think playfulness can be childlike, not just adult play, but child's play as well, and that might broaden the appeal in a sense.
Have you tried the Japanese market? Have you talked?
Not yet, no.
Because those people,
I don't know how to break into it.
fashionistas over there are just insane. If one has it, the whole country has to have it.
Yeah.
You know, and you literally would have to figure out how to mass produce those more complex forms too.
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
He wasn't here.
Next year you might be the new, you know, Bill Gates of jewelry. You know.
Well, it's just the trouble of breaking into a market. Like I only have been living in Portland for just over a year, not quite a year and a half so far. And the reason I moved to Portland is because it has a great art scene. And I walk around, you know, they've got an art show every week. You know, some art walk is going on in some different part of the city every week. And they've got all these different hole-in-the-wall shops that carry a wide variety of objects. And I'm walking through and I'm thinking, I could be in here. I just don't know how to break into the scene.
You knock on the door and show them.
I've actually gotten turned out for doing that.
That's okay. You know, it just takes one.
That's true.
You know, it just takes one.
How does neoprene weather with the elements?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, it was a gasket material. It was supposed to be a gasket material, so it's pretty impervious to things. It does, for example, if you leave it in a hot car, it does tend to smell a little bit. It does get this kind of weird stiffness, but it goes away once it cools back off. That's really all I've noticed with it. But the material itself is very inert. It's very difficult to change it chemically, you know, for it to break down or anything like that.
Does it function like styrofoam? Because I know if you spray paint the tile units and spray paint, how it literally can dissolve the styrofoam. Does
I
it
have
the same
no
thing?
idea, but I don't think that would be an issue with the neoprene.
Because then you could introduce, like what Holly was talking about, you know, just spray paint something to see if you can get a little color.
Yeah.
You don't want it to dissolve right in front of you.
Right. But I mean, that could yield some very interesting results as well.
Yeah.
What about the hazards? Is it flammable?
It is self-extinguishing, actually.
Very good.
I found that out the
So if
easy
you're
way.
on fire-
When I first started working with this stuff, when I first got that permission, I don't know, can you, from my professor, I went down to the studio. I was like, oh, I'm so giddy. You know, I'm carrying this roll of neoprene around the art building. I go into the studio and I just cut off a chunk, and I'm just taking it to all the different things, you know, the different utensils of destruction that are in a jeweler studio. I'm like, oh, will this do anything? Will this do anything? You know, and I get over the torches. I'm like, yeah, why not? You know, it's like I paused for a minute. I was like, let's see what happens. I'll just put it really close to the vent, and the dang thing wouldn't stay on fire. Beyond that, it didn't change it at all. You know, it changed the surface texture, but there wasn't really any, like, you couldn't get any soot off of it or anything like that. Someone once told me you can heat form it. I haven't been able to find any research about that. One guy asked me if I was molding it, and I didn't realize you can pour your own. I still haven't figured out how.
You did mention MSDS sheets for my class.
I did.
Yeah.
And I actually, when I went to the phone shop, I said, do you have an MSDS on this? He goes, why? It's ridiculously benign. I'm like, well, okay.
That's how you make your forms then, through injection molding. They might create molds and you just shoot it in there.
Yeah.
Get your piece.
But the thing with neoprene that I do know is neoprene was originally a solid material. It was originally invented as a substitute for rubber, you know, for tire rubber. But it was never hard enough. I don't think they could vulcanize it properly, or you know, something to that effect. And so I don't know how the solid neoprene turned into foamed neoprene, but that, you know, is something I do know. And so I'm not sure if, you know, if you have to make the neoprene one way and then subject it to another process to achieve the foam. So that's something, you know, maybe I need to talk to DuPont about that.
If a kid came across and started chewing on it or something.
I chew on it all the time.
It's insanely benign.
So.
I don't swallow it, but you know, I mean, if
So I was just wondering about the fumes when you set it on fire. What do we call?
I would just avoid setting it on fire.
Yeah.
What I tell people when they ask, you know, about it compared to other jewelry, I said just treat it like any other piece of jewelry, just more fun. You know, it's
Just more fun. Come on.
you know, if you treat it with the respect that you would, you know, even a piece of toy jewelry, a plastic digital watch, you know, you can beat it up pretty well, but there's certain things that are gonna break it, and that's, you know, it's just pretty common sense stuff, I think. But you know, the only thing about common sense is that it's not common, right? So I don't know. So far, I haven't had any angry moms come and talk to me about it, so we'll see.
I probably don't know for everyone else, but in undergrad I essentially double majored in math and art, and now I'm teaching math here at the university. So I'm noticing that geometrically those are very, if they're hand cut, they're very well done.
The stars
Do you design,
are die cut.
in the computer, and then to get all the angles right, or do you do that all by hand?
Oh, it's all by hand.
Cool.
Yeah.
Props to you.
Thank you. I definitely didn't think about it that hard. I promise you that.
Well, it's a lot of symmetry, so it's some of the stars, it works. But
Yeah, it was a real serendipitous event for me. Hey, there goes that.
Sorry. Any other questions?